Hello, my name is Stephen Mayeux, and in this video series I'll walk you through the React projects at freecodecamp.com. In the last video I went over our plan of attack. We had a strategy for this project, and I suggested breaking up our project into three components, like a higher level like app component, another component for our table right here, and then individual components for each of the list items. So in this video, we're going to build out our first component, which is the app component, and it will include a like a header at the top, and the header should change when we click the buttons. You can see here the text of the header changes. It should also have these two buttons, and these buttons need to handle the event up here. So this isn't magic. We have to wire up our buttons to change the text up there. And more importantly, in our app level component, we're actually going to fetch and get the data that we need to display. And we're going to get this, if you go back to the Free Code Camp page, we're going to get this data. If you go to number 8 and number 9 here, let me blow it up for you. Here are the API endpoints, and they return some JSON data to us. So if we go to this one, we get all that JSON data, and it's basically an array of objects. And the same goes for this API endpoint. It's just an array of objects. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. Let's build out our components for the app. All right, now I got the terminal up. We're going to have to fetch our data. We're going to have to make an AJAX request. And in order to do this, we need to install another dependency. So right now I have my React kind of applications being built. It's running. So I'm going to leave this alone, and I'm just going to open up another tab. You can Command T to open up another tab, and look at that, we're still in the same directory, so that's wonderful. So open up another tab in your terminal, and then write this: npm install -- save and Axios, AXIOS. npm install -- save Axios. Press enter, and it's going to reach out. It's going to get this wonderful library called Axios. It's going to help us write our fetches. Okay, great. Looks like no problems. Command K to clear it out. Now earlier you saw me write this -- save. So what is that doing? Well, if you go back to the project right here, and whoops, here it is. If you go back to our project, there it is. You can go to the package.json, okay, and look, this wasn't here before. Whenever I first showed you this file, package.json, a couple of videos ago, this Axios wasn't in the dependencies, but now it is. So this is really important that you include this -- save when you're installing new dependencies, because if you want to upload your project and push it to GitHub, and if you want other people to collaborate with you, they need the most updated list of dependencies. Otherwise, their code is not going to work. So anytime you're working on a project and you want to install some new dependencies, all right, you can run it with npm install and just the name of the dependency, but it's not going to update the package.json. So definitely keep it in there, that flag, and that'll make sure that you have the most updated list of your dependencies with versions and things like that. Okay, so Axios, it got installed properly. Let's go into our text editor now, and we are in the right one. All right, I'm going to close all of these. We don't need them. Just going to keep app.js. All right, so that looks good. Let's import our Axios library, because we're going to need that. So import Axios from Axios, and that's it. Now it's available to us. Okay, so you might recall that for my first project, that all React components, whether they are functional or class-based, they need to return some JSX. So here we have some JSX, wonderful. This is a class-based component, very easily to recognize it's class-based, and only difference is class-based components, we return the JSX in a render method. So here's a render method. Anytime you're dealing with component level state, you need a class-based component. And if you want to include some helper methods, which we're going to include in just a moment, you need a class-based component. And if you want to hook into the lifecycle methods of React, you'll also need a class-based component. So let's get started. We need a class-based component, so that's totally fine. And we're going to start here with the constructor method. Why? Because I need some component level state in this application. So we're going to call this constructor. Okay. And we're going to give it an argument of props. Okay. And now I'm going to write super, give it props. All right. So this app class, it's actually inheriting a lot of functionality from the component that we pulled off from React. So whenever I calling like super and I pass it in this like props argument, it's actually running the constructor method of our component, and that just gives it some extra functionality. So that's great. And now we need to give our application, our component rather, some initial state. So we're going to write this dot state equals, and it's just going to be an object literal, and I want to have 3 properties. So let's write one for recent campers, okay, and that's going to be an empty array, and all time campers. Again, another empty array. And then we'll write current view, and that's going to be a string. We'll call it recent campers. Okay, so I'm setting the recent campers and all-time campers initially to an empty array. Why? Well, if you go back to the, to the API endpoint, you can see that we have an array of objects. So I'm just mimicking the structure that we're getting from our API endpoint that FreeCodeCamp suggests that we use. Also, in my application, the first view that you get is the recent campers. So I'm just setting that to a default of recent campers, and that's just a string. Okay, wonderful. So we've got our constructor and we're setting up our state, and now we've got our render function. I almost said a bad word right there. Okay, now I'm going to hook into a lifecycle method right now, and this lifecycle method, it's available to class-based components in React. There's several different lifecycle methods. I'm going to show you one of them. It's called component will mount. So in component will mount, this function, okay, it's a function, it's called component will mount. This will run one time before the initial render of your component. So before this function render before it gets run or executed or whatever, this function will run first. And subsequently, if our app component re-renders again and again and again and again or whatever, then this function will not run. So component will mount, it runs only one time before the first render of the component. And I think this is an excellent place to fetch the API for the API data right here. So the recent campers and all-time campers. I think component will mount is a really good place for that. We don't want to fetch it every time the component re-renders. We only want to fetch the data just like one time and then like be done with it. So for this, we're going to need a couple of helper methods to help us get started. So we're going to come back to here, and I'm just going to write a comment. So make concurrent requests and set state to response. All right. So first thing, let's just make some helper methods. We'll call one fetch recent campers. Okay. And notice here that I'm trying to keep all of my variables like consistent, so I don't like make any mistakes down the line. So this is called recent campers, and my helper method is called fetch recent campers. Okay, so let's return Axios get. So we're making a get request. We're not updating or making a post or anything like that. We're just making a get request. So we're going to put the URL in a string. Okay, so let me just copy and paste this one. Copy link address. Yep. Okay, and that's it. Good. Let's go ahead and make another helper method, and we'll say fetch all time campers, and again we'll do the same thing, return Axios get. Okay, and we'll copy that link address, and wonderful. Okay, good. Now here we we could make like one request, wait for the response, store that response, and then make another request to the second API. So we're going to have to make two requests here. We could make one request, wait for the response, and then make the second request. But we can make it faster, and we can use pretty useful helper method in Axios to help us do that. They have wonderful documentation. They're up on GitHub, but I want to show you this snippet right here, performing multiple concurrent requests. So we have two kind of functions right here, and they're very similar to our fetch recent campers and fetch all time campers. Exactly identical. We got an axios.get and another get request right here, and then we're going to use this this syntax. We're going to use axios.all, and we're going to give it an array, and we're going to give it an array of functions. Now in Axios, it returns a promise, which is a new feature in the ES6 version of JavaScript. Basically, we're making a network request, and that's going to take some amount of time, maybe 200 or 300 milliseconds, and the code, it's not going to be able to run immediately. Preceding that, we're going to have to wait for the response to come back from the server in order before we can do anything else. So we can handle these promises, or sort of like this delayed effect. Other people call it asynchronous programming. When we're dealing with promises, we use a .then block to tell it what to do next. So we give all this array of functions, and then we use this sort of syntax here to get access to the response. And we give the spread function here, okay, we give that like an anonymous function, and inside of that anonymous function we give it some arguments. So account here, it refers to the data passed to us by this first function, and permissions, the second argument, is the result of this one. So let's go ahead and write that. And I'm probably going to refer back to this because I might forget some of the syntax. All right, so in component will mount, we're going to make the concurrent request, and we're going to set the state to the response. So I'm going to say Axios, and what was it, .all? Yeah, and I need to give it an array of functions. So first one is going to be this recent, fetch recent campers, and give it those parentheses, comma, this fetch all time campers. Okay, wonderful. And so that looks good. All right, great. Now I'm going to go to the next line. I'm going to press Tab and dot then. Wonderful. So we need Axios.spread, Axios.spread, and that's going to take an anonymous function, and inside of that function, we're just going to get the responses. All right, so let's say recent, and let's say all time, and we'll just keep it recent campers and all time campers. Okay, great. So now this is going to look a little confusing there. Okay. So now, and by this time, okay, the dot then, if there's no errors from the server, okay, now we will have the responses available to us. And so this is where we're going to set the state, okay, and the state will be recent campers and all-time campers. And initially the state were empty arrays. Now we can fill them up and update it to an array of objects. So we can write this dot set state, okay, and we'll pass it an object, right? And remember, this is the only time right here in your constructor function where you could write something like this dot state equals blah 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 blah. If you want to mutate this component state later on, like outside of the constructor function, totally possible, but you have to use this dot set state. So just keep that in mind. And that's basically it. So recent campers and recent campers. So this is the response from our first request, and we're going to set the recent campers property equal to the response. And same thing down here. We'll say all time campers and all time campers. And wonderful. So now our state is updated as soon as we fetch our data. One more note here, just ES6 syntax. You can notice here that the property of my object and the value, which is just a variable, are the same. So we got recent campers, all-time campers, all-time campers. And with the new ES6 syntax, anytime your property or your key and your value are like the same thing, you can just get rid of it. You can just write this. All right, so all-time campers, that's the equivalent to writing like the full thing. So we'll just get rid of that one, and we'll get rid of this one too, and perfect. That looks really, really nice. And this is not really big, so if you wanted to, you can just bring it all up on one line here, just to save yourself some space. Okay, and I think that is totally acceptable to do. Okay, wonderful. So this dot set state, it's changing the component state, and that looks absolutely beautiful. And that's the secret thing. That's what makes our app a little bit faster than the example app that I showed you on the free CodePen example. So free CodePen example. So anyway, because we're just doing the concurrent request and we're doing it in component will mount, we get all the information we need, and we never have to worry about making another network request. It's done. It's finished. All before this gets rendered. Okay, wonderful. So now we've got that, and I'm just going to go back to my terminal. Okay, so everything is still working. Let's save, and let's go back here, and let's just refresh. Okay, we're still getting hello world, okay, because our render method is, hasn't changed. But let's open up our dev tools, okay, and let's go to our network right here. Okay, and let's do this again. Okay, and you can see right here we have our two requests. So this is for the recent API and the all-time API. And so here it is, and here it is. You can get all the information. But look at it here. It's kind of small for you to see. But basically, right, these two green lines right here, let me see if I can do this. Is it, how do you zoom in? I always forget this. It's just like, oh, here we go, sweet. So basically these two green lines, these represent the network requests, and they're happening at the same time. So the top green one is from recent, and the all-time one is the second green line. So these network requests, they're happening at the same time. We don't have to make one, wait for a response, and then make another request. So that Axios helper, that's really, really cool. Okay, we're almost done with this component. Let's just go ahead and update the render method so that it can reflect our changes. So first thing we're going to need, I'm just going to wrap everything in a div, because you can't have adjacent JSX elements. You're going to get some error. Okay, I'll just get some space right here. All right, first thing I want to do is just have a header, so h2, and I'm just going to write some text, and we'll say displaying, and we'll say this. We'll say displaying campers for right now. Okay, cool. Then now let's add our buttons here. Okay, we're going to say button. Okay. And our button, it's going to have a couple of things. We're going to need a bootstrap class, so class name, not class, but class name. Okay, so btn and btn primary. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and say recent, and then we'll do the same thing here. Button, all right. Class name, button, btn primary. We'll do the same thing. We'll say all time. Okay. And let's just save this. Let's refresh the page. Okay, good. And we'll do a little bit of styling to clean that all up. Let's do that right now, actually. So we got our buttons right here. And I'm just going to say btn, and we'll give it some, we'll give it like a margin of, I don't know, we'll say 20 pixels. Okay, that looks good. That's a lot of margin. Let's just do, I don't know, 5 pixels. Okay, that's much better. All right, cool. So got that out of the way, and we'll change that to Sass later. To fulfill the requirements of this project. Okay, and actually we're gonna stop right here because this video has become like really long. So let's stop right here. In the next video, I'm gonna just wrap up this component so we can get the correct so we can get like the correct display happening. So you remember from the example, I can click on the buttons and it'll display this sort of message. Right now in our app, nothing is happening. So let's stop right here because it's getting quite long. In the next video, we'll wire up these we'll wire up these buttons so it'll display the header, and then of course we'll work on the next component, which will be the table. Okay, take a break, go get a beverage, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Boop.